my name's Amanda Bryan, and I'm based near Inverness, in the Highlands, and I guess I've had a range of non-exec roles for almost sort of 25, over 25 years now, which is a bit alarming when I think about it. Yeah, and that's been across the public sector, the private sector, and the voluntary sector. Largely focused around land and asset management, because that's my background. I'm trained as a forester, although I actually started off life as an electrical engineer. But a lot of the things that I've been involved with have generally had that sort of land and sort of wider asset management background. So I've served on the board of Scottish Natural Heritage, for example, also served on the board of the Forestry Commission Crown Estate Scotland. From a public sector, I'm an advisor to Forestry Investment Fund in the private sector, and I've served on the boards of Community Energy Scotland, and also I chaired the board of the Isle of Egg Heritage Trust for a 3-year period as well. So a real sort of diversity of experience there. It's quite interesting because when you live in the Highlands, using technology isn't necessarily new. It's actually something that many organisations, particularly those organisations that have been dispersed, have been doing for some time. So, for example, when I was on the board of Scottish Natural Heritage, which was quite some time ago now, even 15, 20 years ago, SNH was using technology to enable engagement with some of the folks on the islands, for example, and also involved in my day job with UHI, the University of the Highlands and Islands, and we've been using sort of distance learning and sort of virtual learning for literally for decades. So I guess in many ways that hasn't changed. It was something that I was very familiar with. On the plus side, I think organisations elsewhere have recognised that technology is your friend, and I guess it's made the approach to meetings much more inclusive. I've historically always had roles in sort of national organisations, and quite often that meant having to travel always to meetings because there was always an expectation that people would be there in person, whereas now there's a much greater acceptance of the fact that you might not be able to attend every meeting in person, and therefore arrangements are now in place for the use of Teams or Zoom or whichever platform people tend to use. So it's definitely made life easier for some organisations, but certainly it's not something that is new to those of us who perhaps don't live in the Central Belt or even south of the border. From my perspective, it's really important that there is geographical diversity on boards, particularly of national bodies, because at the end of the day, it's really important to have that lived experience, because unless you have that lived experience and you're bringing that in its sort of broadest sense into any organisation that serves that wider community, then you're not necessarily taking all of that into account. I also spent some time on advisory committees for both BBC and for Ofcom, and there, given the nature of that communications piece, it's so important to recognise that the experience of those living in particularly the sort of rural communities are taken into consideration. We have all sorts of issues in the Highlands to do with additional delivery costs, for example, challenges in terms of broadband connectivity, and unless that is fully represented in decision making, then sometimes decisions are made that dramatically have a much greater impact on people living in these areas. So it's crucially important that people from different parts of the country are encouraged to apply to be on boards, and yes, the fact that now we don't have to spend 2 or 3 times the amount of time traveling to get to a meeting as it does actually in the meeting itself. That's really helped, and I think will certainly make it easier for people to apply, because not everybody can take a huge amount of time off work just to attend meetings. So if you can do that via distance, then that's really helpful. I mean, it is quite interesting, sort of moving from being a sort of trustee or a board member to being a chair. I've also chaired. I chaired the National Committee for Forestry Commission Scotland and chaired the Board of Crown Estate Scotland as well. But what was, you generally find that within any board there are a number of subgroups or subcommittees, and you generally get a chair experience of being a chair through chairing one of those subcommittees, and that really helped me sort of develop and sort of take that step up to chairing a larger organisation. So there's always these kind of opportunities that present themselves. The key thing about being a chair is it is slightly different, because what you're trying to do is then bring together that group of people that you're responsible for to come to an agreed position on taking things forward, rather than just being one of those voices in that group. So it does almost require you to put your own views not quite to one side, because obviously you still hold them and you can bring them out, but actually you just have to play a more facilitative role, I guess, in terms of bringing things to a conclusion. Bearing in mind that my first appointment was, as I said, over 25 years ago, so I would have been in my late 20s at the time, and I guess my experience up until that point had been that the people that I tended to see on boards didn't necessarily look like me. Not only was I not retired, but I also wasn't male, and I thought to myself, well, I can't really complain about that if I'm not prepared to do something about it. So that's really what made me apply for my first board position. Because at the end of the day, if you're not prepared to put yourself forward, then you're not going to see anybody that looks like you on those boards. And actually, that very first board that I applied to, I was appointed, much to my surprise. And interestingly, at the time, I didn't actually have a huge amount of confidence. I thought, what am I doing here? I felt a bit like an imposter. And really, the thing that I took from that is actually I did have something to contribute, and I was very grateful that people, that those involved actually saw something in me that perhaps I didn't even see in myself, and that was a really positive experience for me. I guess I would just have more confidence that I did have something to contribute. I was probably a bit quiet initially, but because of the nature of the board and the individuals that I was fortunate to have around me, they were very supportive and encouraged me to speak up. And actually, after about a year, I was actually appointed as deputy chair, which was a massive vote of confidence, and really gave me a lot more confidence in my own abilities. So I think that's the key thing, is don't underestimate what you have to offer. Looking back, over the different roles that I've had and the different organisations I've been with, the times, and I'm not sure I would have said that they were particularly enjoyable at the time, because sometimes they were really difficult, but the times that I have in retrospect enjoyed and felt that I individually got the most out of, and actually were really positive in terms of board cohesion, were where the organisations were facing really quite challenging and difficult times, and that might seem a bit counterintuitive, but it's sometimes when you have that shared challenge that you're facing, and you really have to come together and focus and sort out what are the priorities and how you're going to address them, that sometimes is the real opportunity for learning and growth. When everything is easy, you would think that that might be the best times, but actually not at all. There's never a dull moment when you are facing these challenges. So I think that's possibly the thing that would surprise me most, is that the difficult stuff is sometimes the best stuff. I think there's two things. So one is actually about the friendships you make. I look back at particularly to that first appointment, and many of the people who I have continued to keep in contact with, and who have also provided a degree of mentorship and support throughout my career, really date back to that very first appointment. And that's something that has been incredibly invaluable to me throughout the process. And I think that is something that you wouldn't necessarily get in other environments. And linked to that, it is that piece around sort of continuing professional development, in terms of that exposure to experiences that you wouldn't get in any other environment. And I've always looked at these sort of board and sort of trustee appointments as being, it's not just about me contributing something, and generally that's, you've got to think about what it is you're going to be giving to the organisation, but it's also about what learning are you going to get from that organisation, and whether that's because there are individuals there that you feel that you can learn from, or they're dealing with areas that are slightly out with your comfort zone. So that, I think, is again something that you wouldn't necessarily do in a work-based situation, but it's something that you can certainly get through a board position. I would say don't ever rule yourself out. So, if you look at something, at an opportunity, and you feel that you can readily identify something that you can actively contribute, then that is the way to think about it. It's very easy to look at opportunities as they come up and be sort of quite critical and say, oh, well, I don't meet this or this requirement. The reality is if you do have something, even if you're only sort of hitting one or two of the things that they say that they're looking for, and that you definitely have something to contribute, then I would seriously consider putting yourself forward for that. That's the key thing, because it comes back to that whole piece around confidence again. Sometimes people will see things in you that you don't necessarily see in yourself, and it's very easy to be self-critical.